We're just thrilled tonight to have McShane and Fintan McShane presenting together about family tripping, sharing some tips and tricks from their own experiences. So our first presenter, Finn, is a recent high school grad. And something you may not know is that he co-founded an outdoors club at his high school, which is really awesome. Finn is currently figuring out next life steps, and he is awaiting and deciding between post-secondary acceptances. So lots of big decisions ahead for Finn. And he's joined tonight with his mother, Michelle. Michelle is currently the executive director of Paddle Canada. She is a member and director of Get Kids Paddling. And Michelle loves family tripping, but has also recently discovered the joys of solo backpacking. So with that introduction, I will turn it over to Michelle and Finn to take it away and let us know about their own family experiences.
Thank you, Liz. I'm going to let Finn take over the technical part of figuring out how to share our screen and stuff. And as he's getting it out, I just want to thank everybody for coming. I hope that you learn one or two little tips from us tonight, and hopefully by the end you'll share some of your own, and maybe we'll learn something from the rest of the group in the room. I'm not going to profess that we are experts in this field or anything like that. We have been tripping as a family for quite some time. And really tonight we're going to share a few of our family stories, sort of how we started tripping together and how we got from the picture on the left to the picture on the right. For me, I guess for all of us, it sort of started when I was about 12 years old. My parents had been separated for a couple of years, and my mom was set up on a date with a gentleman by the name of Kenny. Kenny was an outdoorsman. So he introduced us to some backcountry camping and stuff. And actually, Mom and him started dating in October. So our first backcountry experience was actually on skis, and it was winter camping. The photo there on your left. The following summer, he took us on our first canoe trip. I look back on that time a little bit as we got away with some pretty crazy stuff. The photo on the right there are 4 people and a dog and an awful lot of gear in this canoe. We were probably in Algonquin Park for a few days at this point. Kenny was an outdoorsman, but I don't know that he was necessarily trained in anything. When I pulled these photos out, I apologize for the quality of them. This is probably the late 80s, early 90s when these were snapped. Finn, when I pulled these photos out, he might have made a little fun of us about our impeccable tarping skills on the photo on the left, and immediately pointed out how I was holding my paddle on the photo on the right. But I think that maybe in retrospect, we weren't actually paddling at this moment. Kenny fancied himself as a bit of a photographer and was probably just taking a picture of us. At any rate, this sort of sparked something in me, and between my mom, myself, and teachers at my school, I was introduced into some outdoor education programs and to the Toronto District School Board, where we were living at the time. And I had the opportunity to do a few trips with the Outdoor Center. And I learned a thing or two, and it was pretty exciting to come back to my family and teach them things like how to put a tarp up properly, how to hold your paddle properly, how to do the J-stroke, and some other tips and tricks that I had learned about portaging and paddling. So we'll fast forward to the mid to late 90s. I went to college in Lindsay at Sir Sandford Fleming College, where I met my future husband. And he also had a background in the outdoors. His was not necessarily introduced to him by his family. He was a student with the outdoor education program here in the Kingston area. And he went through that program as a student and then later as staff. School also, his high school teachers and guidance counselors like mine recommended him to Sir Sandford Fleming College, which is where we both went. And coincidentally, Finn just got accepted into a program there. So part of his future life decisions might land him at the same college where his parents ended up. Anyway, we met. We also were part of an outdoors club. The photo on the left was, or on the right, was a dog sledding trip we did through the outdoors club there in college. We both got summer jobs as, over the years, different things. I worked at a summer camp. He worked for the school board, the same program that he went through as a student. We both did sort of outdoor education camps. We did a little bit of commercial guiding. We eventually sort of grew up, left school, continued on with life. We got the dog, we got married, we bought the house. We kept doing trips, sometimes for work and sometimes for just our own enjoyment. And eventually, this is in 2005, our first son was born, Finn. He was born in late September, so his sort of beginnings to backcountry experiences were not far off from mine in that they started with winter stuff. His first backcountry experiences were on skis, or rather in a homemade polk that Sean built that consisted of a little bassinet in a sled with wooden sort of dowels that he attached to an old hip belt off of a backpack. So we would strap Finn in and we would go skiing in our neighborhood. And that's sort of how we started as a, backcountry tripping family, if you will, with children. So the following summer, after he was born, just before his first birthday, we decided to venture out on our first canoe trip as a family.
Yeah, so I didn't know at the time, but it was like the first trip of a pretty long and growing list of various outdoor adventures and misadventures, which is kind of fun.
I still laugh a little bit at the memory when we told Sean's parents that we were going to go on this little canoe trip with our baby. His mom was a bit concerned and sort of questioned us, like, are you sure you want to take the baby? Like, if you want to go on a canoe trip, you can leave the baby with us. And our response was, well, if other parents trust us with their kids on canoe trips, you should probably trust us on a canoe trip with our own. We just admitted to her a couple of years ago on that particular first trip with Finn, this crazy storm had rolled in on our campsite, and we had just sort of settled him into his tent. He was peacefully sleeping. We poured ourselves a little glass of wine, and we were settling down by the fire when this crazy storm sort of blew in. And so I'm trying to hold down the tarp and all of our gear, and Sean had run over to where the tent was. And just as he got there and grabbed hold of it, this wind sort of slipped under the tent and kind of lifted the tent a little bit off the ground. And he held it down, and the baby sort of lifted his head, looked up at his dad, kind of smiled or made some kind of baby noise, and promptly dropped his head back down and fell asleep. And we had this moment of, oh my goodness, the wind almost took our baby away. Like maybe we're doing something crazy here. But we kept doing it. Everybody survived. The storm didn't do anything. Now, this first trip, we're really fortunate that we live on the border of Provincial Park, Frontenac Provincial Park. So this first canoe trip, some people might suggest it wasn't a canoe trip because we didn't do any portages and it was pretty close to home. But this will actually bring us to our first tip of the night, which for us, it starts small. Like trips don't have to be epic or long. There's a lot of talk about adventures and what an adventure needs to be. And, if it's not a certain length or a certain distance, is it really an adventure? And a canoe trip, even if there's no portages or anything like that, it's still a canoe trip. Our first trip, it's a 30-minute drive followed by about a 30-minute paddle. At that time, it was probably more like a 45 to an hour long paddle because only one adult was paddling, as I had the curious baby to tend to. We learned a lot on that trip. We learned to lower our expectations. Again, kind of going back to this was just going to be a short trip. It wasn't anything epic. Our expectation was hopefully just to survive it and spend the 3 days out there doing what we wanted to do. As we were packing, we were having this whole moment of, what are we going to bring? Like, we had a playpen at home, but we certainly didn't want to bring a playpen on a canoe trip. And we had this epiphany that, well, we have a playpen, we have this canoe. So our next tip of the night is, your canoe is a playpen. We would bring it up on land into the middle of our campground. And when we had to do camp chores, or we needed a moment where we weren't chasing this crawling baby around, we plunked him in the canoe. And that bought us some time. It was like this great little playpen. After losing a toy pretty quickly to the lake, we realized we don't need to bring toys. We can give him sticks and pine cones. And so we would fill the canoe with these items. And when we were in camp, like in this photo, he would play with them. But when we were out paddling with him, he just loved throwing things over the side of the canoe and watching them float away. And if we didn't lose any more toys. I think we lost one toy on that trip, and then quickly pivoted and introduced this. So the following summer, we were pregnant with our second child, so we actually didn't do a trip. But in 2008, I think this was, we had found ourselves with 2 kids now, and we wanted to do another trip, but we weren't quite brave enough to do a canoe trip. And we decided, well, we weren't big on car camping. We hadn't done a lot of it, but we thought, well, car camping is still camping. Let's do that and sort of still explore what it's like to be camping as a family with 2 small kids. But we would have a car and running water, and we didn't have to like carry everything. So we did I think it was about a week-long car camping canoe trip in Algonquin Park. We did learn lots of things on that trip. We learned that an almost 3-year-old can, in fact, hike about 5 kilometers. We did lots of naps. We did lots of snacking. Ian, the baby, he was quite the crawler, and he liked to eat dirt. And we found that car camping sites actually, for some reason, are dirtier than your backcountry ones. So we learned we would spread our tarp. We had a big tarp, and we spread it out on the ground so we could plunk him in the middle of it. And it would just give us a couple of seconds. If he started crawling off like crazy towards the edge of the tarp, we could run over and scoop him up before he started covering himself and his mouth with dirt. So the following year, I think we are in 2009 now. The boys were about 2 and 4, almost 2 and 4, and we were ready for our first official canoe trip as a family of 4. But we cheated a little bit because we brought a third adult. So we brought Sean's brother. We brought an uncle along with us. He came in a kayak, so we had a canoe and a kayak. I think we might have done one small portage on this trip. I can't remember exactly. But bringing another adult really sort of helped in the entertainment and keeping kids on, taking care of the kids while we ended up doing a lot of the camp chores. By this time, I don't know that both of them had a small canoe paddle at this time, but Finn there on the left had his own paddle, and as you can see, he was quite proud of it. We learned a lot of other things on this trip, and going back to the earlier conversation about losing toys to the water, by now we had also learned we would tie toys and stuff into the canoe. So if you look at the photo, Ian is the baby there in the front. We've actually tied his soother to his PFD. So when he felt like spitting it out or trying to toss it out the side of the boat, he couldn't do that. It was attached. So when he needed it, it was there. So we learned to tie, I think with Finn at this point, we had a little toy boat or something that we had tied to one of the thwarts so he could throw it into the water and kind of pull it back in like a fishing pole. And not only did it save us from losing things, it was a whole other fun game to play, to throw yourself out, throw their toys out of the canoe and bring them back in. Fourth tip here was we learned that bringing beach buckets and little nets provided hours of entertainment when we were on our campsite. So the boys would use their nets to scoop fish and frogs and snails and whatever they could find in the water. They would inspect them and sort of it was a bit of a catch and release thing, but it again, when you're on campsite with little kids and they're just wanting to explore and you don't want to be chasing them all the time, we could all sit at the edge of the water, and this would provide hours and hours of entertainment. So that was what our first couple of years looked like. The next year, we took it up a level and we started adding portages to our trips. So by now they were, I think about three, I think there were 3 and 5. Again, we're still in Frontenac Park. We're still really close to home. They were pretty comfortable walking and around with us and stuff like that. And we decided that we wanted to take them to a lake, still in our park. But I think this particular portage was about a 700-meter portage. On this first trip, we brought the uncle again. So we had 3 adults and 2 kids. So it meant 2 adults were carrying the bulk of the gear, and we had someone else to sort of portage the kids, if you will. You can see in the photo on the left, Ian is the size of one of our gear packs, and he insisted he'd be able to carry it, and well, he could not. But if you look to the photo on the right, they both have their own little day packs. They're both carrying their own PFDs. And so, this leads us to our next tip when it comes to portaging and even the trip period, letting the kids pick out their own bits of gear and letting them carry their own stuff. So in this photo, you can see we've upgraded our little tiny net. We found these bigger, more durable nets from a local toy store. So they each had these bigger nets that were not like the little tiny ones that you get if you have an aquarium at home. They both had a small backpack, so they would carry their own PFDs attached to the outside of their backpack. They would carry their own net, and in their backpack, they would have, a couple of snacks and their water bottle. And I think it was just having that ownership of they had a little bit of their own gear. They were really, really proud of their packs and the fact that, they could carry a pack like mom and dad could. We haven't talked about snacks yet. Those of you with kids, period, or any experience with kids, it doesn't matter whether you're on a canoe trip or a road trip or hanging out in your own backyard. It's all about the snacks. So we always had to make sure we had plenty of good food and that they got to be included in the picking of the food and the making of the food and, of course, the eating of the food. The photo up in the top left corner there is at the end of our first portage. And we found these, I think these were made by Nalgene. They're these plastic canteens that we would put our gorp in so that we weren't constantly opening and ripping into, Ziploc bags. And we had to have snack breaks and gorp breaks all of the time. The other things the boys really liked to have when they were small was their own bits of gear. So the photo in the top right corner, we had this little family camping pack that came with, 4 plates, 4 bowls, and 4 cups. And they liked picking out their own colors, and they had their own special cups that matched mom and dad's cups. So they felt like part of the group. They also had their little tiny camping chairs that were a Christmas present from a friend. And not necessarily a family camping trip, but Sean and I had been using sarongs as a trip item for a long time. They make a great, towel, dress, picnic blanket, sheet in your bed. So at this point, I think we had taken the kids shopping and they got to pick out their own. So again, this was just them having a little bit of gear that matched ours, but was their very own. And I think it just kind of gave them ownership and made them feel that they were sort of part of everything. I call this mom tip number 6, but these were actually dad's tricks, and just sort of being around camp. So there's one thing about traveling through the day and doing the portages and stuff, but when they're small, we would travel for a little bit of time, but then there was a lot of time in the campsite that we had to do things. So we talked a little bit earlier about nature's toys. So the photo down there on your left is Finn sitting on the ground there, and they had gone around and collected sticks and pine cones and rocks and all kinds of things, and we would create art or these little villages, and then they would create these little villages and pieces of artwork and have these whole stories around what was going on in their little piece of art. And then they got to come through. I think in this one, Finn has actually created this little village. And if you look at the tiny little feet just beside him, this was Ian probably just about to come in and stomp out the village. And I'm sure there were tears after it. But again, this was another thing that created lots of entertainment on site, with little risk of loss. And then the other dad trick was he would take pieces of charred wood and wet them, or he would char a cork, and it would be face paint. And so the kids would just love to have, war paint painted on them, or they get mustaches and beards, and then they had to go in the water and swim it off. So again, just more fun and easy little things to do on the campsite. So we continued on in this way for the next couple of years, usually just doing weekend trips. Eventually they would get a little bit longer. We would add a couple more portages. We would explore new areas, but we never really left too far from home. Again, the kids, the photo on the right, I think we've got some baked potatoes and some Jiffy Pop going on there, and a couple of very interested boys in what their next meal was going to be. So I don't know, food's a pretty big draw for us. I'm imagine it is for many. Eventually, we started adding different elements to our excursions. So we started cross-country skiing with them. So we would take them on the odd winter sort of weekend trip into Gatineau Park, where we would camp in the ready-to-camp cabins and yurts. Sometimes we would invite other families with small kids who maybe weren't as into tripping as us, but were intrigued by what we did, so they would come and join us for a night. And
I think maybe Michelle lost internet.
uh-oh. Have you lost us?
I still got you. Graham, here I've got video and sound.
Okay. Is everybody else still with us?
Yep, all clear.
Okay.
You're good, Michelle.
Okay, sorry. We get Finn to bring us back to where we were. So yeah, sometimes we would bring other families to sort of show them what we were doing, and friends and food really made for successful nights. We also added other elements of paddle sports. So we introduced them to a little bit of stand-up paddleboarding. We introduced them to kayaking. One year, we actually decided to attempt a kayaking trip to the Saguenay Fjord. So to prepare for that, the boys and I think Sean was working at the time, so the boys and I went out and sort of just did a day trip in some kayaks to introduce them to it and give them a little taste. There's some crazy stuff that happened on that trip, and I hesitate. Sometimes I struggle with whether or not it was a successful trip or not, but I guess it was successful in that we did it and we came home. But we learned a lot about how to be better prepared when you are venturing out into something new. Fishing became a really important part of what the boys liked to do. Dad was a big fisherman, and he introduced the boys to fishing. So fishing became pretty integral to our trips, to the point that we would pick the lakes and we would pick the route, and we would even plan our menu based around the success or not success of fishing. And this opened up another door, that even if we didn't have the time or the capacity to get out on an actual canoe trip, we knew that we could load up our canoe and our fishing gear and go explore a lake for even just for an afternoon. If we knew we were going to catch fish and bring lunch, that was great. By the time they were, I think, 7 and 9, we turned into a two canoe tripping family. And I think this is probably when we started being a little bit more intentional in the lessons while we were on trip. I don't know if it was a blessing or a curse that they had a couple of outdoor educator parents who were also paddling instructors. But I'm pretty sure that this photo, they're 7 and 9, and they were super great, but they could handle the boat for short periods of time. So we would get into camp, and then they would go out and learn a few strokes, and Dad would take them out and teach them a few things here and there. So by this time, they were definitely more involved in our planning and our cooking. And like I said, a lot of our menus revolved around fish. Eventually, they could carry a little bit more on the portages. They could follow the path. When we first started portaging with them, a parent or an adult would always stay with them. But as they got a bit older and, uncle stopped coming and we had more gear to carry, what we would do is we would sandwich them between us. So one parent would go first. We'd give them a little bit of a head start. Then we'd send the two boys out. And then the other parent would hang back and enjoy a few moments of silence and alone time, I suppose. And it was intentional here. We wanted them to be alone on the trail for a little bit. They could read, so they knew if they came to a sign in Frontenac, a lot of the junctions would be marked. So they knew they had to follow yellow. They always knew the name of the lake that we wanted to end up at. They knew that if they came into a fork in the trail and they didn't know what to do, then they were just supposed to stop and wait for either the lead parent to come back or the caboose to catch up with them. But I think they really sort of enjoyed those few moments of perceived freedom of being completely and utterly alone in the woods. And then camp chores, as they got a little bit older, their responsibilities around camp grew. So they would be in charge of things like making water. Ian on the left there is filtering some water. Perhaps we've also at this point taught them how to make coffee. They were both taught to make fire at a pretty early age. So they enjoyed that. The older they got, the more difficult the chore got. They really enjoyed securing our food for the night, whether that was a food canoe or a bear hang. That was, for some reason, they always found that a little bit fun. And now I'll pause for a second, and Finn's going to share one of his first tips of the night.
Yeah, so I want to go over kind of the whole chore structure on trip, and especially with kids. It's a good spot to create some buy-in with the Outdoors Club that I run at my school. I learned there's a lot of people who were into tripping and then kind of got out of it because they didn't have a whole lot of buy-in. So especially with chores, because it's something that has to happen every day, but it can be made really fun. Like if you hand a 9-year-old a box of matches and some birch bark and tell them to get a campfire going, it's going to be a memory that they're gonna keep with them forever. Or like, hey, can you come here? I want to teach you some knots, and then go work on tying up a bear hang, stuff like that. It's just building skills and also a little bit of confidence in kids to keep them coming back and making sure that they're actually looking forward to trip as not just going away, but is actually doing something. That's pretty much all I wanted to touch on for that. But
so in 2017, the boys were now 9 and 11, and our family, we were literally offered the trip of a lifetime. We were invited, so Sean and I were hired as canoe guys for an expedition trip on the Decho, which is the traditional name for the Mackenzie River. It was going to be for the whole summer. We were traveling from Fort Providence up to Fort Good Hope. We spent a week in the north, in the Yellowknife area prior to the trip, doing some training and learning with the indigenous school and group that we were traveling with. Part of getting this job is we were allowed and in fact encouraged to bring our kids. So this group was looking for two canoe guides. We heard about it, we applied, and I guess being a family with two parents who had the capacity to be able to lead this trip, we were hired to do this. And for us, it was really exciting to be able to take everything that we had taught the kids and learned as a family to do these small canoe trips, to now spend this 7 weeks, I think we were gone. So 6 weeks, I think
67 days.
67 days.
Yeah.
So we were traveling on the river with a group of people. Our group changed a little bit, anywhere from 14 to 27 people. We were in some, we had 2 north canoes like you're seeing there, and a handful of tandem canoes. But for us, I think not only was it this wonderful opportunity to do this fantastic trip north, we knew that everything that we had learned about being on a canoe trip with a family, really allowed this opportunity for us. And it was really, really fun for us to see these two boys, how they had this confidence in themselves. There were other kids on this trip as well. There were a few families, and I think all in all there were 9 kids, sort of all roughly in the same age group as these two. But these two knew what to do. They knew what it meant to do chores, and how, like, you couldn't just go to bed when you were tired because there were things to do, and they knew how to interact with other people, and the self-sufficiency involved in being on a trip. And I know that we never would have been able to do this if we hadn't already sort of laid this groundwork, about being, being a working family on a canoe trip. So that was, I mean, regardless of where we went in our family canoe tripping resume, if you will, that was a pretty wonderful opportunity, and it really changed how we continued on, or really built upon how we continued on tripping as a family after that. So after that trip sort of brought us, or I guess maybe it was during that trip, or even the planning for that trip, where there was a big shift in our family trips. And this is sort of where I often joke about, when the kids were little, they were an extra barrel or extra baggage on our canoe trips. But it was during that trip, or the lead up to that trip, where they really kind of shifted from being participants to trip mates. So after that trip, like I said, there was a shift in our trips. Our lessons and their learnings became a little bit more intentional. By now, they could read maps. They could help pick a course. When we rolled into a prospective campsite, they were usually the ones that we would push out of the canoe to go and see if the site was going to be good enough for us. And as they became more engaged, our trips got a little bit longer. Portages got a little bit longer. Their appetites, as they grew, their appetites grew as our gear got heavier. So, at some point, mom and dad didn't always have to carry the canoe or the heaviest pack.
Yeah. So one thing that I kind of learned from that, and something that's pretty important, is not coddling your kids. So on portages is a good example of this. This is what I kind of shows for this slide. But when you look at it a little bit differently, a portage is a really great opportunity to kind of like show your kid a little bit of tough love and get them like doing something really hard, but that they know they can do, and getting them to do it by themselves. So the portage trail is a great place to teach some of the fundamentals of tripping. It allows kids to feel like they're by themselves when they're in like a known area, and you kind of know where they're going, because they can, like, if you plan it right, they can only go straight forward or straight backwards, and they'll hit a lake on each end. It also allows kids to kind of get a sense of like, do I actually like this, like being off by myself? And then it also like really teaches like you got to persevere and keep going, like mind over matter, or else it's just going to be kind of more unpleasant in the long run, which is like something I've noticed. Not that people are soft, but a lot of people don't really believe in themselves to the capacity that they really should. The human body is like a machine if you use it right, and like kind of teaching yourself how to operate yourself properly can really lead to a lot of enjoyment on trips, I've found.
I think this newfound freedom of them being able to portage and cook and help plan stuff. Again, our trips evolved and changed. 2 adults weren't always needed on trips. So I think around this time, Sean and the boys started their annual boys trip. So this photo, I think, is probably the first time they left me at home. And funny side story, though, is I dropped them off at the put-in, took the obligatory pictures, drove myself home, was all ramped up for a nice evening of, I don't know, silly shows on Netflix and wine. And I think I just poured my first glass of wine and my phone rang. It was Sean. I was like, uh-oh, why are they phoning? What's going on? So it turns out, as they were packing their gear, they had accidentally packed the broken stove. So I was asked to drive back to the put-in. Fortunately, they were in the park in our neighborhood. So I corked the wine, and I got the functioning stove, and I drove to the put-in where they had paddled back to meet me, and gave them the new stove and worked my way home. Well, I found out later, as they were waiting for me, Sean had said to the boys, what's the lesson here? And I think the answer he was looking for was to always check your gear, but one of the boys quipped, we do need mom.
And I don't think we told mom this, but we realized as she was pulling out and we were getting started on dinner that we'd forgotten all of our cutlery. So that trip was also a lesson in chopstick making, for me at least.
The trips kept evolving. Like I said, sometimes not. They had their boys' trip. There was one year where it was just me and the boys. They don't look quite as happy here with just me as they did with Dad. We started doing a fall trip. We called it Campsgiving. So we would go on a mini canoe trip over the camp over Thanksgiving weekend. We added in a little bit of winter camping, which usually revolved around ice fishing. Again, they have never lost their love for fishing. Sometimes the trips would be all four of us. Like I said, sometimes just the three of us. Last summer, Fintan was actually away for most of the summer on trips with the school board here. So he was gone for the month of August doing a kayaking trip around the coast of Anacostia. So Ian and I, and Sean was working and couldn't get the time off. So, Ian and I did a couple of trips on our own. And that was, the last 2 summers, I don't think I've ever carried a canoe because they could do that and could help set up the tarp and cook the meals, that kinds of things. As I said, our learnings kept growing. One other little tip I'd like to share that we learned a number of years ago were personal gorp bags. And so this came from getting sick of constantly being asked, can we have gorp? Can we have gorp? And everybody picking through it and then running out of gorp on day 3. So I don't know, in our early years, we decided everybody would get their own gorp bag. So we would shop for it all together. We would mix it up in this big, huge wooden salad bowl we had, and everybody would get their own bag. And what this did for us in the early years when we first started it gave them sort of gear management. So this bag of gorp didn't go in the group gear. You were responsible for your own. Do you remember those? I don't think I did it in high school, but I remember reading stories of like that high school project where you had a doll that was like a baby and you had to keep it alive for a week. So this was that sort of same idea, was everybody had their own bag of gorp. You were in charge of the management. You could eat it when you wanted to. It would be currency. They had to make sure it made it into the food canoe at night. I think we only had one loss of a gorp bag, and it was not either of the kids. It wasn't mine either. But that was a game changer that we did for a long time. Cooking, as they got older, they could cook more intricate meals, and they would be in charge of planning at least one dinner a night. This is Finn. His specialty is a spicy peanut pasta. This was I actually remember this meal. We were on Joe Lake in Algonquin Park, and it had been a long day, and we were super hungry, and nobody wanted to cook except for him, and it was good because it was his night to cook. They learned how to bake. This was in Georgian Bay. We were on a kayaking trip, and they had collected a bunch of blueberries, and they're actually pretty good at making bannock that they learned how to make on our trip in the north, where they actually won a contest in Fort Good Hope and won some cash for their bannock making skills. Eventually, our boat configurations looked a little more like this than what you saw earlier in our slideshow. 2020 was a big, sort of our next big year for us in our family tripping. It was COVID. There wasn't much to do. Everybody was kind of stuck at home. And I think that year we spent about 50 nights out. So we did kayaking on Georgian Bay. We did a longer canoe trip in Killarney, a longer canoe trip in Algonquin Park. And these were the ones where they really, really started to shine, and the portaging skills got bigger, and the cooking and stuff like that got bigger. And it was just probably around that time that they became old enough to get involved as students on canoe trips with the outdoor education program that's here in Kingston, which is, where Finn did his long trip in Anacostia. Yeah, my final words, really, I guess, before I'll let Finn speak in a second. I feel like we're pretty fortunate in that this is something that was introduced to both my husband and I when we were young, and we were fortunate that that spark stayed alive in both of us, and we found each other and decided this is what we wanted to do with our kids. And I wish that more families had the tools to be able to take their kids camping. And like I said in the beginning, it doesn't have to be anything big or crazy or epic. It can be car camping. Some of our fondest memories are doing some simple car camping stuff. And sometimes I feel really fortunate that, or really privileged, our kids are privileged that they have the parents that they do, and that sounds really crazy to say, but we had the tools and the skills, and somebody sparked something in us when we were kids that allowed us to pass that spark on to our kids. So I don't think it has to take a lot to light that spark and keep it going.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah. So just kind of my closing statements here, I guess. So why I kind of stuck with the hobby is something that probably some of you guys are wondering. And like for me, I found it was harder to not stick with it than it was to stick with it. It's always something like I'm always looking forward to it. I've got a trip with my dad coming up at the end of the month. We're going winter camping, and like still already talking to all my buddies and plotting some trips for this summer before we're all off out in the world. So it's something that's just like been such a big part of my life that I've kind of prioritized it now. And I want to talk about like growing up as a camping kid. As funny as that sounds, but it gave me a lot of confidence and independence. I found where like I knew that I could do something harder than whatever I was doing. Like I took up cross country running, which was probably in part due to like portaging at a young age and knowing that I can do things that might not be the most enjoyable all the time. And I'm like, my friends have made note of the fact that I'm pretty good at not being stressed out about tests and things like that when it's like just kind of being skilled at compartmentalizing, which I definitely got from tripping. And then some like kind of tips and tricks to keep kids engaged and interested. So teaching like fun stuff. Like I always look forward to like firelighting and fishing and knot lessons and all sorts of stuff like that are just like going out and having a whole bunch of fun in the forest and then coming back home. So keeping kids like super engaged, so they're not looking forward to trip ending. Like I don't think it should ever be you should ever have a trip where your kids are like, when do we get to go home? It should always be like the last thing said should be when are we coming back? That's kind of my sentiment on it.